welcome Mary Beth. Feel free to introduce yourself and kind of take it away from there.
You. Again, my name is Mary Beth Harrington. I am here today in beautiful, wonderful Tumwater, Washington, where it's very sunny and 70 degrees, like normal here. Anyway, Washington State, but originally I'm from Texas, and I have traveled all over the country helping nonprofits be more effective and sustainable. I like to say that I've worked with all different types of organizations, everything from AIDS organizations to zoos and everything in between. Because throughout my career with nonprofits, I've usually with what we call a non-direct service organization. So like a volunteer center or an organization that supports nonprofits throughout the state and different things like that. So that gave me the opportunity to, again, meet with multitude of different nonprofits. One other thing, Matt said that the recordings are going to be provided to you in the presentation. My presentations are not copyrighted. My goal is to help all nonprofits be more effective and sustainable, and I don't care how that happens. So some of you mentioned that you're an executive director at one organization, you're on the board with a couple others. You can share the slides with any organization. Don't feel like you have that they're proprietary or anything. If you see or hear some information that's really relative to another organization, please, please, please share it with them. Likewise, the other thing that makes me a little bit unique is my counseling and advice sessions are totally free. Totally free. It doesn't matter where you are in the country because we're going to do by Zoom anyway. Thank you, Denise. So if later on you're reading the presentation, there's something that you don't remember, or you're thinking, she said something. And I've had people contact me 3 years later and say, remember the presentation you did and blah, blah, blah. Well, and so feel free to follow up with me. My email address is on the bottom of every page. It's at the end. There's plenty of ways to get in contact with me. And last but not least, we've asked you to share your information on the chat. Thank you very much. If you didn't know this, at the very, very top of the chat where it says top 10 things, every board, there are 3 dots. If you click on those 3 dots, and I suggest you do this towards the end, you can save the chat. Now, this is the long text version. Most of you are too young to remember when that's what we got, but so it may not look as formatted as you like, but that way you can, if you see somebody's information that you want to follow up on or something that we said in the chat, you can follow up with that way as well. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. All right, so today we're going to be talking about 10 things every board member should know, but often don't. So I developed this presentation because I was working with a lot of nonprofits, specifically with board members, and no offense to the board members who are with us today, but a lot of times board members think that they understand what their role is, but really don't. So this presentation is for executive directors and for staff, but also for board members, so that, and it's not everything. We're going to be here for 90 minutes. Which I know is a long period of time, but really when I do this presentation for real, it's 3 hours. And it's the information that the Internal Revenue Service and the Secretary of State's office and Attorney Generals, that's the information that they want you to know. So I condensed a lot of this information. There's a lot more to it. So again, if you want more information, feel free to follow up with me. But this is just to start to, let's say, whet your appetite or help you as a board member or as an executive director to recognize that there may be some things about aspects of board work that you may not be aware of. So first, I'm going to start with a little bit of technology, terminology, excuse me. And the reason I do this is because there's no rules in the nonprofit as to what certain titles or positions are. So if you're like me, you may have encountered a lot of different names for titles for persons. So for instance, the leader of your organization, the person who is paid to lead the organization, is usually called the CEO or executive director. I've also seen it president. I had a boss once who wanted to go by CEO president. He just deemed that was his title. I tend to use the term executive director. If you're an all-volunteer board, obviously you're not going to have somebody who is the executive director. This is a hired professional who leads the organization and reports to the board. The second terminology is president or board chair. I like to call it board chair because of the confusion we have with that president title, but there are some organizations where the president, who is the leader of the board, or is called president or board president. Now notice I did say leader, but I kind of caution saying that because this person is not in charge of the board, and that's really important to understand. The board is a self-governing board, i.e. everybody is responsible for everybody else. So while the board chair does absolutely have certain responsibilities and has certain duties and a role to fulfill, they're not the ultimate be all end all in charge of the board. The full board works together, and we'll talk a lot more about that later. You also should have a governance board. That's required by the Internal Revenue Service. Now, some organizations will have an advisory board or other different boards, and there's challenges with that, which we will talk about. But basically, you usually have one board that's called the governance board, and that is the board who is ultimately responsible for the organization. Executive committee or executive council, and you'll see me get this word and the next terminology mixed up just because I get to talking and forget what I'm saying. But the executive committee or council are the board officers. So that's the president, the vice president, secretary, treasurer, things like that. Now, the trend in nonprofits now, while most of you probably have that position listed in your bylaws, the trend is to not have that position, not have an executive committee, because your executive committee should not meet more often than your board. Remember, your full board is responsible for the organization. And what we find is when we have an executive committee that's really active, engaged, and meeting, then the rest of the board feels like they have a diminished role, or they feel like they don't need to really pay attention because the executive committee is paying attention. The executive committee or the board officers, basically, they really should only meet in times of emergency. For instance, if there's a flood in your organization and you need a vote by the board immediately to pay somebody $50,000 to clean it up. That's something where the executive committee or the board officers can get together, make a decision, and then report it back at the next board meeting. So it's really an emergency situation. And then the last is the executive session. That's when the board meets without the staff. And the staff includes the executive director. And you should be doing this on a regular basis, specifically to do an evaluation of your executive director. So that's a little bit of terminology. So you kind of know who I'm referring to when I refer to people. Now, if we're together, it'd be really nice to do this poll together and have everybody raise their hands, but we're not. So we're going to use the chat feature for this. So make sure that you're ready to answer your question or answer this question. So if your organization were a body, what would the board be? And I'm going to give multiple choice. I'm going to give you several options, but let me be clear to say that all of these are correct. Everything is correct, and everything is sometimes more correct than others, but there's one of these answers that is the best answer, okay? So there's one that's best, but all are correct. So if your organization were a body, the board would be the hands, the one that are out there doing work, making things happen. Perhaps the board is the brain behind the organization. Perhaps the board is the legs. Again, all of these are correct at some point in time, but there's one we'll say best answer. So are you the hands, the brain, the legs? Are you the backbone of the organization? Are you the heart? Are you the heart of the organization? Or the last, are you the guts? Are you the intestines of the organization? So go ahead and take just a few seconds and type in the chat. Matt will reply to me, give me a heads up as to how many people said what, or just generally what the idea is. Again, all of these are correct, but there's one best answer.
Yeah, so far getting quite a few brains. We have a couple hands coming in. Backbone. We do have a couple hearts in there. Yep, we've got two hearts coming in. Yeah, it looks like three or four brains, some hands, some backbone.
That's good.
Yeah.
You so much for taking the time to do this, folks. I really appreciate it. So the best answer in this situation is heart. Your organization, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Your board is the heart of the organization. So I am not a doctor. Forgive me for my lack of medical expertise, but what I understand from being from physiology class was that your brain could still be operating or could be dead and yet your body is still going, right? Or your hands are, you don't have a hand, or there's different things like that. But your heart is indispensable. Your heart has to keep beating, even if it's being done by a machine, because once your heart stops circulating blood to your organs, you're no longer with us. And so that's why the heart is the board is the heart of the organization, because it's circulating energy and blood, lifeblood for that organization, to the hands, to the backbone, to the brain, to the intestines, to the legs. So that's why we say that. Again, they're all correct at some point in time, but I want you to understand that without a board, your organization would not be alive. So that is why the board is the heart of the organization. So talking about the board, what do we mean by the board? You hear me refer to the board very often. And when I refer to the board, I mean, this sometimes somebody thinks of it as this anonymous, different people. But the board is one. The board is one. So I know you're all unique, you're special, your own little snowflake and everything like that. I understand that. So you all have definitely uniqueness to you and individuality. But when I refer to the board, I'm referring to one being, one group. I don't care if you think about it in terms of a multi-headed monster or some kind of religious connotation of Trinity or whatever, but the board is one. And so let me tell you a way that articulates this best. Go back into your memory banks. Some of us have to go a little bit deeper than others. And remember back in grade school when there was a thing called field day. Remember field day? And there was a race. It was called a three-legged race where you tied your ankles to another person, had to run in the same direction. And that wasn't always easy, right? But you had to make sure that you guys both understood where you were going and that you were going in the same direction. Well, folks, if you have a 12-person board, your board members are all tied by an ankle to each other, okay? So just think of it this way. The board has to move in the same direction. You can bring in different ideas and things like that in your meetings, but once you make a decision, the board has to move in the same direction. And the board cannot no one individual can make the decision for the board. All the meetings or all the decisions are by the full board. Now it can be contentious. Different people could say vote yay and some people vote no, but whatever the majority rules is usually what the bylaw state will be the decision of the group. So remember, your board, when we refer to the board, we refer to as one entity. No one board member, even the president, is more important than the rest of the rest of the board. That comes sometimes as a great shock to many people. And nonprofit executive directors, I've met all kinds. I've met the dictator, the servant, the guru, the visionary, the Yoda type person. I've even met the executive director who's more like the secretary. And none of these are actually correct. And I have been all of these at some point in time. But really, the way the relationship with the executive director and the board is one of a partnership. That's what really needs to be happening, is it needs to be a partnership between. Now it's very unique because most of the time a board person, I mean, you're usually not partnering with somebody that has control of your job, but that's the case. So let's move on to the whose job is it anyway. And these ones, we'll use the chat again, and this will be a little bit faster than the other one. Your options are for correct answers are the board or executive director. There are only two. You have no other options. Your answer should be the board or executive director, and all will be made clear to second. So remember, executive director board. So whose job is it anyway? So governance. Let's say, for instance, regarding the strategic plan, whose responsibility is it to develop and implement the strategic plan for your nonprofit organization? Again, who is responsible for developing as well as implementing the strategic plan for your organization? Your two options are executive director or board. That's your only two. So give Matt a chance to just kind of give a look. We don't have to be exact, but
Yeah, it's a pretty even split actually. We've got just about equal on either side.
okay. So the correct answer is the board. It is the board's responsibility. And some of you might be saying, well, no. The executive director has to do the job, do the part of it. Yeah, the executive director should be part of the development. Yes, and they should be part of the implementation. Yes, but I said who is ultimately responsible, and ultimately the board is responsible for the development and ensuring implementation of the strategic plan. So the next getting to the fiduciary, the 990s. You all should know that you have to report the 990s. So again, who is responsible for ensuring that the 990s are completed and turned into the IRS on time? The executive director or the board? And those are your only two options. Executive director or board. Who is ultimately responsible for ensuring that the 990s are completed and turned in on time?
This one is a little bit more slanted. We're getting a lot more people saying board than ED on this one.
Mm, thank you. You guys are
Yeah.
very, very smart. You're starting to catch on. Yeah, the board. The board is responsible. Yes, you might have a treasurer, or you might have an accountant who works on it, but it's really important as a board to take a look at the 990s because those are becoming that's a public document, and donors can look at it. And I've had donors come to me and say, "Hey, why are you paying so and so so much salary?" Because they can see what your top 5 salaries are for your organization and where you're getting some of your funding and things like that. Okay, the next is board management. Who is ultimately responsible for ensuring that the minutes from the board meetings are taken and recorded? Not recorded, I don't mean like recorded, but like stored. That's it, stored. Who is ultimately responsible for the minutes for your organization? The executive director or the board? And the secretary is not an option, folks.
Yeah, I think folks are catching on. This one is the board. That most people are saying the board as well.
Right. And that is. And in fact, if you have somebody other than a board member doing your minutes, we need to talk. Okay. I'm just going to leave it like we need to talk because that's a dangerous situation. So yeah, it's the responsibility of the board. And just to be fun, just so you know, doesn't necessarily have to be the secretary. Board recruitment, going a little faster here. Who's responsible for recruiting board members? Executive director, board. I don't know about you, but I've never been in a position where I get to hire my boss. And that is basically what you're doing if you're allowing the executive director to recruit board members. Now, they may identify individuals whom they think would be advantageous to be on the board, but ultimately it's the board's responsibility to select and elect board members.
And that's what folks are saying across the board. We got board as the answer for that one.
Okay. Good job. All right. And then financial sustainability and advocacy. Who's responsible for making sure that you have enough funds to keep the doors open, as well as for advocating for the organization and the community? Now, again, everybody should be doing this, but who is ultimately responsible for that?
Yep, everybody's saying the board on this one.
Very good. Yes, the board. Obviously, like I said, the executive director and staff do take some responsibility for it, but ultimately, board members, that's your job. Financial sustainability and advocacy. And finally, evaluation. Who is responsible for evaluating the executive director? Ding, 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 board, right?
Yep, everybody's saying board.
So who is responsible for evaluating the board?
Looks like folks are also saying board for that one.
Very good.
Yep.
Yes. and you should do evaluations. We'll talk all of these 6 things are going to be what we quickly talk about in the top 10 things you should know. So some a little bit longer than others, but we'll cover all these. So congratulations, you're starting to understand what we're talking about and why sometimes this is just so confusing. So the first thing you need to know is that every board member should know is board service is a job. It is a job. A lot of people don't like to necessarily hear this. This is not your father's nonprofit board. Chances are previous nonprofit boards you served on have been ineffective. That doesn't mean they're bad. They're just ineffective because a lot of times people don't take classes like this. And so they learn how to be a board member based on their experience with one board. And if you are on a ineffective board, then when you go to the next board, you're going to take that understanding with you and maybe, teach it to other board members. So that's what we say it's ineffective. It's more than attending board meetings. If the only thing that you're doing as a board member is attending board meetings, then you're not fulfilling your responsibility. You should consider this your new part-time job. That doesn't mean it's 20 hours a week every week, but you know what? There definitely should be some weeks where it does feel like it's a part-time job. That, am I working for this organization kind of thing? It requires 100% commitment from 100% of your board membership, and I like to say 100% of the time. Now, I live in the real world. I know that people get sick, jobs get busy, travel happens. I understand that that may not be the case all of the time, but that is ultimately what we're hoping for, is 100% commitment. Because I don't know about you, but I've served on like parents associations where you have 35 parent groups, for the class, and you have 5 individuals who are in charge of the Halloween party and the Valentine's Day party and the carnival and all that. And that's not fair. Sorry, I'm getting off of my soapbox. It's a little passionate thing for me, but it's not fair. It's not fair for all of that to fall on some people. Now, everybody has different skill sets. Everybody has different things to offer, so that's fine. But what every board member needs to do is figure out how they fit into the organization, what skill sets, what they bring, and they need to participate 100%. 100% of your board, because otherwise those people that are not participating are what I call or refer to as coasters. They're just coasting along, and that's not fair. Because they're not only is it not fair to the other people who are engaged, it's not fair because you're not sharing your expertise and your skill set and your networking and everything that you bring to the organization. It should be considered an honor, a privilege, and a duty to serve on a board. And we like to say, if you've seen one nonprofit board, you've seen one nonprofit board. I also like to refer to that, how they always say you can't step into the same river twice because the river has changed. The same thing happens to your board. And so one year to the next, you may have some new board members or somebody terms off. And some boards, you may not have anybody new, but the knowledge base of the current board members is increasing. So maybe you had a new board member came on last year and they really didn't share much. They didn't speak up. Well, it's because they were still kind of figuring things out and learning. But then their sophomore year, you might hear from them more because now they have a better understanding of the organization and a better understanding of their role. So that board has effectively changed. So again, your board that's one of the challenges for those of you who are executive directors, is that your foundation is constantly changing and shifting, and you have a different board. If you have a different board chair, then sometimes there's a different different plan or strategic plan or different ideology or different emphasis, or it's just different. And so that's one of the things that makes this whole process very, very challenging. One thing I meant to mention earlier, as I said, Matt's going to be sending you all the presentation, the PowerPoint, but the PowerPoint includes a lot more slides that I'm showing you. So don't be overwhelmed when you get the deck and it says 84 slides or something, and you're like, I don't remember going through all 84 slides, because I've included a lot of information that I think it's important for you to know, but it's nothing that I necessarily need to go over right now. So just want to give you a heads up about that. It should be a considered, we talked about a duty of care. Board members should act as an ordinary person should act. So therefore you must come to meetings prepared. That means read the board packet before the meeting. And I don't care. I was on a hospital board and my board packet was 200 pages. Yeah, I didn't really want to read it. I especially didn't want to read it when I got on Sunday for the board meeting on Monday. That wasn't very kind of them. But it's important because I'm going to tell you, folks, if you don't read the board packet, we're all going to know because you're going to ask some question or something that you think is perfectly honest and a good question to ask, and it's going to have been answered in the board packet. It just happens. So, and then the board speaks with one voice and respects the wishes of the majority. I kind of mentioned this before, and I'm going to say this again. You're going to hear me, kind of hit this one really hard because it's really important. When you make a decision in the board meeting and you walk out the board meeting, you have to be on this, you have to say what the wishes of the board are. So let me explain. So, for instance, you're at a board meeting and then afterwards you walk out and you go to the grocery store. And you're in the grocery store and somebody comes up to you and said, now, why did the board decide to do that? Now, what were they thinking? That was so stupid. You can't sit there and say, you're right, the board was totally stupid. Or you're right, I didn't vote that way. I voted against it, but I don't know what they're thinking. You cannot do that. I understand you're all individuals and special and unique. I get that. I understand that you all have a right to your own vote, and you should make that vote in that board meeting. But when you walk out of that board meeting, what you should say in that situation is the board felt it was in the best interest of the organization to do this. And when they say, no, really, you can tell me. I won't tell anybody. You say the board felt it was in the best interest to do this. Now, that's not saying you agreed with the board. That's just saying that the board felt it was the best interest of the organization to do blah, blah, blah. And it's important for you to do that because people do not like to support organizations that are having conflict, that are having discussions, that are under duress, whether people are not getting along. And so I have seen organizations close the doors within 6 months of a contentious decision being made because half the board was out in the community, disagreed with the rest of the board. That cannot happen. Again, if you're having that situation, follow up with me. We'll talk longer. Duty of loyalty, you must put the interests of the organization above your own. So obviously you should have a conflict of interest policy and consistently enforce it. And the easy way to think about this is it should never look or smell fishy. A decision should never smell fishy. So for instance, I was working with a Habitat for Humanity organization. There was a board member who owned a paint store. And that board member could not figure out why Habitat wasn't buying paint from him. Now, if he was making them giving it to them for free or making a great discount that was different than Lowe's or Home Depot or something, there's things to be considered there. But a board member should not profit from being on the board. And so what I like to say is, imagine that same scenario being on the front page of your paper and you just reading it. What would you think? Well, Habitat for Humanity is buying paint from blah, blah, blah. And it could be totally true, but if you saw it in the paper, what would you think? You also have a duty of honesty. Like I said, you have to make sure that you follow the bylaws. The bylaws are the rules of the game, guys. So if you contact me, half the time, the first question I'm going to say is, have you checked your bylaws? Because a lot of your answers are in your bylaws. Make sure that you're fulfilling your 990s and different things like that. One of the best things that most organizations love when I do these presentations is learning about board commitment letters. So what a board commitment letter, and I know that you have job descriptions for all your board positions, right? Yes, Mary Beth, we do have, yes, because you really should. There's a lot of reasons you should, from a volunteer management standpoint, if nothing else. So you have and of course your bylaws say board, but a lot of times people don't read the bylaws. I know that comes as a total shock, surprise to you guys, but some people don't read the bylaws or don't know the roles and things like that. And it's really, remember, you're a self-governing board, and so you have to have a way of governing each other. And so that's where the board commitment letter comes in. So this is something that you can develop. I like to do it in January, and the full board gets together and they decide what the commitment they're committing to each other. So it usually starts with some of the easy things, like I commit to attend 8 out of 12 board meetings. Now, sometimes people say, I want to say 12. Well, again, I live in the real world. Somebody's going to miss a board meeting. So you can say, I commit to do this. If you have a donation amount or some donation that you expect every board member to give towards the organization, that can be in there. If you expect board members to do a certain amount of volunteer time or fundraising or attend events or whatever. I mean, as a board, you kind of decide this as yourself, but it's like, I commit to you that I'm going to do this. And it's written by the full board and signed. And then what happens is at the end of the year, the board chair, this is one of their special roles. The board chair takes that information and they develop a spreadsheet to assess, how well you've done. And then they meet individually with each board member. And so if you have a board member who missed, let's say, half of the meetings, 6 meetings, you may want to sit down and visit with that board member and say, you said you were going to be at 8 meetings and you only made it to 6. I understand that there's been some mitigating circumstances in your life. Maybe this is not the best time to be on this board. And I find that verbiage helps really, really well. Maybe this is not the best time for you to be on this board. And a lot of times board members take that as what I call a bless and release. It's like, oh my God, I've been feeling so guilty because I can't go to all the meetings. And you're right. I just, my plate's overflowing. I can't be on this board, and bless and release. And that's fine. It's fine. Or somebody comes back and says, look, this year was an anomaly. I had this, such and such happen. All this stuff happened. I'm going to do better next year. And the board chair could say, okay, come on. Yes, let's see you do better next year. And maybe they do. And if they don't, but this is, again, remember we said about evaluating boards. This is one way. There's a couple others we'll talk about. One way of evaluating individual board members and keeping the board expectations high. Like you expect 100% commitment from 100% of your board 100% of the time. So that was number 1. Number 2, stay in your lane. Okay. And again, if you're an all volunteer organization, this becomes a lot more difficult. But if you're an organization that actually has at least one hired person, one staff person, then this is generally how this is. So your board chair, their role is to act as a liaison between the executive director and the board members. And also they may, if we'll say the board members, let's say a couple board members are in conflict or something, then the board chair's role is to go in sort of like a parent and mediate the situation. Okay. But also the board works between the board members and the executive director. Okay. The executive director acts as a liaison between the board chair and the handles day-to-day staff. And that includes volunteers. So the executive director handles day-to-day operations for the organization, and they work directly with the staff and volunteers. And if there's a situation between staff or different staff or volunteers, then the executive director handles that. And then if there's now the real challenge comes in when sometimes you might have a board member who has a challenge, who is challenged by a staff member or the executive director. And I've seen this happen before. I've also had situations, I had a situation I was working with in Texas where we had a new executive director who wasn't doing anything illegal, immoral, or unethical. Those are your 3 caveats to know. They weren't doing anything illegal, immoral, or unethical. The staff just didn't like their management style. And so the staff started going to the board chair or started to go to the board members to try to get the executive director fired. Folks, that's what we call mutiny. Okay? It's inappropriate. It is inappropriate for a staff or volunteers or even the executive director to discuss issues or challenges that they may be having with individual board members. Remember, the board works as one. Now, you can't have all the board members in meetings all the time, so that's where the board chair comes in. So that's kind of, I know that sounds kind of harsh. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no opportunities for board members to talk to staff. That's fine. In fact, you probably serve on committees together, and it's totally understandable that you're going to have some conversations about the work that the committee is doing. But it's inappropriate for board members to go to lunch with staff. It's inappropriate for board members to vacation with staff. I've seen this happen, or with the executive director. That's we have to have a line of demarcation here down the middle. Again, if you're having a specific situations about that, feel free to follow up with me because that is a challenge. So expectations for the staff. So the executive director attends board meetings and provides a report based on behalf of the staff. But if you want certain staff to attend a board meeting, then that's really something you have to ask your executive director. Your executive director deems whether they want individual staff members to attend your board meetings. The only staff member who is required to attend your board meetings is the executive director. So the board expects the executive director to manage the staff and have obviously succession plans and handle all staffing issues. I'm on a board right now, and when there are challenges or issues like somebody is fired or somebody's terminated or somebody leaves, we as a board do not know the whole story, nor should we know the whole story. Our job is not operations. We have a more visionary, we're looking to the future for the organization. We do not handle day-to-day operations. It's very challenging, but very important. And then board and staff relations, like I've said, you do not supervise staff, you do not intervene in staff issues. And it's just a complicated situation, a complicated relationship. So through board orientation should be required for all members, for all board members. That includes previous board members. This is a quick list of some things that could be included in your board orientation. Some people take my presentation and use it, but the most important facet that people need to understand is that they bring their connections and networks. Yes, they could bring financial donations and they bring other things to the board, but that connections and networks is what's most crucial, is what you bring to the organization. It's also important to understand that when a new board member comes into the organization, it's like coming into the middle of a movie where you're trying to figure out what's the plot or who's who or who are the actors. Is that the good guy? Is that the bad guy? Kind of thing. And so that's why the orientation is really helpful to kind of set the stage for the board members so that they kind of have a better idea of the organization. It's still probably going to take them a year and a half to understand your organization fully, but at least they have a little bit of some basis of foundation to go by. And then, as I said before, you have ultimate responsibility for strategic direction. One of the things we like to say is that you should be looking at the strategic plan at every board meeting. That doesn't mean it has to go into long detail or anything like that. We use red light, yellow light, green light as a suggestion, like red, goal number 1, where are you? Red, yellow, green. Basically, where are you in the process? And there might be very good reasons why you're at red. So that's not a negative or something to be ashamed of. But the idea is to just keep the strategic plan in front of you, because that's really what you should be following to move the organization forward. I do a lot of strategic plans with organizations, and it confounds me how many times people come up with strategic plans. They're all a bunch of gobbledygook, nothing that they really intend to do, but they spend time developing this so that they can say they have a strategic plan, but it's not really a plan. They're not really going to implement it. What I suggest for you, and I've seen this happen, is that basically you have your strategic plan. And then your board develops an annual work plan, because remember, your board is responsible for the development and implementation of the plan. So it's really great if your board decides, takes a look at the plan and says, okay, these are the aspects that we're going to work on as a board. You have a goal of increasing membership within your organization by 30%. Well, these are the things we as a board are going to do to help you succeed with that. And then your membership committee or your annual, your committees, different committees, your marketing committee maybe could be looking at the plan saying, okay, well, these are the things we're going to do. Because oftentimes people say, well, we have committees, but they don't do anything. To which I say, what have you asked them to do? So show them the plan. Not every goal may be applicable to that individual committee, but let them look at that and say, this is what we're going to do. And then, of course, what your staff's going to do. And so the thing is that all these different groups who are stakeholders in your organization are all moving together towards the successful completion of your plan. Because folks, this is not a triangle. This is an arrow, and it's moving forward. And that is what your organization will do if you do this. And folks, when I've seen this happen, it's a beautiful thing. It just really is, because everybody's working in the same direction towards the same goals. Your organization, you have ultimate responsibility for the mission. That's why it's really important to have your mission maybe printed at the top of your board agenda, because your mission statement articulates the essence of why your organization exists. If you have a vision statement is what the world would look like if you completed your mission. And so it's really good to have this right in front of every board member, so that as you're making decisions, you can be reminded, this is our mission, this is our vision. Is that vision or a decision in line with what we're trying to do and accomplish? It's really good to have an annual planning retreat where you can, assess and look at your strategic plan, making sure that the goals are smart. What I like to call them is they make sense. You know what completion looks like. When I work with an organization, I always say, okay, so if we completed that goal, what would it look like, to make sure that you have something measurable, achievable, etc. Number 4, board members can be personally responsible for mismanagement. Most of the time, this is when people really start to wake up and get shocked by what I'm saying, because board members need to prudently handle the organization's resources. And the resources are the staff and the funds and the organization and the organization's reputation as well. You have all that as your responsibility. And I have seen board members who had to write checks. Yes, write personal checks to cover fraud that had happened in their organization. And yes, these organizations did have directors and officers insurance, but that didn't matter, because they still were not fulfilling their fiduciary responsibilities, and they were held liable for that. So being on a board is serious business, and a lot of people don't realize that. You should act for the good of the organization rather than personal benefit. And every decision should be towards moving the organization forward towards completion of the mission. Policies you should have: conflict of interest, which we've mentioned, whistleblower, document destruction policy. Those are easily obtained. If you want copies of them, I can send them to you. Those are things you can copy and paste. That's fine. Bylaws don't copy and paste, but those you can. And then, of course, we mentioned directors and officers insurance. Number 5, board management is the responsibility for the board members. I kind of talked about this a little bit. You should hold effective board meetings. They don't have to be monthly, but I just find that it's more helpful if they're monthly. If they're quarterly, you spend more time talking about what you think you did last meeting than what you're doing. Usually, 90 minutes or so. Again, I've had lots of board meetings that are longer and some board meetings that are shorter. The board leads the meeting. The board is responsible for all the board documents. So not the executive director. Now the executive director may send them out, but the minutes and the financials and everything, the board is ultimately, it's your board meeting. It's not the executive director's meeting. And so therefore you're responsible. And as I said earlier, never, ever, ever have the executive director or staff member take the minutes for your board meeting. Unless it's a good idea if you included executive session at every meeting. That's the session where you meet without the staff because, quite frankly, I had an organization I was executive director for who all of a sudden, after never having executive session, said, "Hey, Mary Beth, you need to leave. We're going to go into executive session." To which, what did I think? Yeah, I thought I was going to be fired. Now they were planning a surprise party. I didn't know that. So, I mean, executive directors, we get a little paranoid sometimes. I'm sorry. And so you're going to have that meeting at some point, talk about evaluation. And so it's kind of a good idea just to kind of get in the habit of having an executive session, 10 to 15 minutes at the end of every meeting, so that when you do have to have a discussion about the executive director, maybe it's a salary increase, maybe it's disciplinary action or whatever, it's just that time is already set, so it doesn't come as a shock or surprise to anybody. So notice we're going really fast. I told you we were going to go really fast. Don't ask your friends to join the board. So who are you going to ask if you're not going to ask your friends, right? So first of all, let's talk about nominating committees for a second. Okay, I have seen this happen where nominating committee comes up in October or November and nobody wants to be on the nominating committee because everybody thinks that the nominating committee is the one who goes out and recruit board members. Okay, so first of all, let's get it out of your head that that's the nominating committee's responsibility. The nominating committee does the paperwork. Okay, if you have an application, the nominating committee makes sure that all the candidates complete an application. If you do criminal background checks, which you should be doing on your board members, we'll talk about that if you need to separately offline. They make sure. So they handle all the paperwork, but ultimately it's every single board member's responsibility for recruiting board members. So remember back to that commitment letter? Yeah. So one of the things that a lot of boards I work with add to the commitment letter is a requirement that every board member will identify a candidate for the board. Now, wait a minute. You're saying, Mary Beth, well, Mary Beth, we have 12 board members and 3 openings. You're right. You're going to have something called an election. You're going to actually have to choose. Instead of taking the next warm body who comes through the door, you're going to have to figure out who is the best candidate. It will make your board members a lot more effective and a lot more engaged. And you'll have a better board for that. So, and you simply tell the candidates that what you're doing, you're having an election kind of thing. Again, we can explain that a little bit more offline, but I hope you get the idea from that. And then the other thing to do when you're thinking about recruiting board members is not going through your mental Rolodex of, oh, I know Bill. Bill's a nice person. Oh, I know Sally. Sally's a nice person. Do not think of names. Take some time and do an inventory of what you have on the board. So for instance, you may, first of all, you look at gender. How many men you have, how many women? Are you in a board that looking for people who are LGBTQ plus or something like that? That listed too. What's the average age of your board member? I was working with a board once where, seriously, it was in Houston area. And I looked out and every single board member was male, was white, and was over the age of 70. And so one of the things I asked them, I said, kind of looked at them, I said, so who's missing? And they looked around, they said, Ted's missing. It's like, oh, women, younger people, kind of thing. Your board should reflect the community you're serving. So if you are in Seattle, it should reflect what Seattle looks like. If you're in Amarillo, it should look like Amarillo kind of thing. And so basically you do an inventory of your board. And this is the example I use everywhere I go. So if you do an inventory and you say, okay, looking at this inventory, We're looking for a man who is Hispanic heritage, who is in his mid 40s, who knows technology. Okay. Like I said, that's just a generic thing. And so, therefore, as a board, we go out and we're trying to find that person. Now, we may not find that person. That's okay. Because we have this, we have identified this, we're going to start looking at other individuals that chances are we never would have looked at and totally didn't think about. And it wasn't like we're trying to be exclusive or anything. It's just they didn't come to mind. Oh, I didn't think they wanted to be on the board. And so therefore you're going to start to notice and identify different individuals because your board needs to reflect the community that you serve. So again, expanding your board, looking at genders, areas of interest, areas of the community. I mean, you don't want all the board members coming from the west side of the community or something like that. And then, of course, the terminology I used earlier was bless and release. There's always an opportunity to bless and release the board members that aren't doing the things that we've been talking about. And you don't have to be a board member to be involved. Remember, we have this thing called committees. So I call committees the farm team. If some of you know baseball, like that's your farm team. So the idea is if you have an individual that you think might be a good board member, but you don't really know them that well or don't know how well they know the organization, invite them to be on a committee. And then if they do a great job of the committee, as my husband said, that you did the last thankless job so well, we're going to give you a new one and grow them into the board members. So there's a way for you to get people to be engaged in and think about it. Instead of just being on your organization or your board for 6 years, that's 2-3-year terms. They could be there for 9 years. They could be there supporting your organization, donating to your organization, advocating for your organization for a lot more years. And to make sure that your committees are doing something. The advisory boards, which I mentioned before, we're trying to get away from talking about advisory boards because too many people think that if you're on your advisory board, then automatically you're going to ask them for advice and they're going to take that advice. And B, the term board makes them think that they have more responsibility than they actually do. So personally, I like the term friends. I take that from the libraries and the museum world, friends. So you can have, if you have a former board members or community VIPs or people who can't be on your board for different reasons, maybe they're just busy or, they've donated to your organization, but you know that they're really not going to do all this work that we're talking about, then the idea is put them on the friends organization. Number 8, fundraising and advocacy are part of the job. They are part of the job of being a board member. So most effective fundraising. So we have different arrows here and I'll explain how, I'll let the arrows run and I'll explain how it works. Your greatest success rate, whoops, oh, it didn't run. And the animation didn't work. Sorry, folks. I'll explain. So your greatest success rate is individual contributions, i.e. the easiest money to get are individual contributions. Now, some of you are like, no, that's really, really hard. You're right. It's hard, but it's easier than grants, corporate donations, and special events. The amount of time and effort, if you look on the right side column, the amount of time and effort you put towards special events, a lot of times your special events are not making any money. Now, you may refute me, and that's totally fair. But if you take into consideration the amount of staff time and volunteer time it takes to put on that special event, that fundraiser, that run, that walk, that auction, that gala, that car wash, that bake sale, whatever, you may find that it's not necessarily worth it. Now, hold on. I like special events. I'll explain in a second. But again, individual contributions are the most effective fundraising. Now, it doesn't mean that's the only thing you do. You should have all of these in your quiver, so to speak. But you should be doing all of these things, but that tends to be the most successful. Now, let's talk about that special events for a second, because I think special events are special, but I don't think people are getting the most out of them. So I'm not going to ask you to do chat for this one, just real quick, but just think for yourself, which of these is the real purpose of the special event? To make as much money as possible, or to use the event as a way to market our mission to cultivate potential new donors. And if we make a profit, all the better. You guys were really, really smart with the first one, so I figure you're going to be smart with this one. It's number 2, right? 2. So the thing is, you need to look at your special events and make sure that you are marketing your mission. So for instance, I have been to lots of bike races and run walks and, auctions and everything, like golf tournaments. I'm sorry, I hate golf tournaments. Nothing about golf tournaments. There's reasons you have to. I was working with a group in Memphis, and the group was like, I was telling I hate golf tournaments, and they said, Mary Beth, we have to have the golf tournament. It's the only way we're going to get the doctors and the lawyers and the bankers to come. Okay, that we have to do that. Okay, fine. So we were talking, and I said, so how can we ensure that everybody who comes through through the golf tournament knows what our mission is and knows why the community would be devastated if our organization did not exist? And this was a court-appointed special advocates, a CASA organization. And so, the thing about golf tournaments is everybody comes at a different time. They're teeing off at different times. So some people are coming early, some people are coming late. So standing up there at some point in time, talking about your mission, you're not going to be meeting and engaging everybody. So what we did was we identified 18 advocates for the organization. That is court-appointed special advocates, people who were volunteering to support children who were in the system, so to speak. And we put every single one of them at one of the holes, so that every single group that went through the course that day heard 18 different stories about how effective the organization was and what a difference they were having. And I'm not kidding, folks. When I saw the people leaving, bankers, lawyers, attorneys, all of them, they were crying or they were choked up because they had heard 18 incredible stories of what a difference this organization was making in the community. So that's what I'm talking about, is taking it up another level to make sure that every single person, they're not just seeing the video or hearing from some people, that's good, but making sure that they really understand why your organization is essential to the community. The second thing about fundraisers, what's the most critical? Marketing the event to the community, or marketing the event coupled with 100% support by the board to promote, solicit, volunteer, and attend. Number 2. Yeah, number 2, obviously. When I go to an event, if I'm walking around and I don't see board members, I'm thinking, why do I have to be here? If a board member is not, and things happen. I've missed events because I've been traveling or something. It happens. But really, you should have board members at every event, because they're there to advocate and to talk up your organization while the staff is running around trying to make sure everybody has enough food and drink and everything. Board members as fundraisers, it's imperative for board members to recognize this. So you need to set expectations that it is part of their job, communicate how it relates to the mission. You probably need some training, and understand that you don't necessarily need rich people. That's a fallacy that a lot of people think. I know a bunch of rich people, and they will donate to the organization that they're on the board for, but they're not going to ask their friends to donate. And so the deal is, you don't not necessarily want influential or affluent people. You want people who know a lot of people, because ultimately you want to be increasing the number of people in the community who know about your organization. And then realize that if board members are not going to be fundraisers, then you need to recognize, if you're going to be the board that reduces services, change the mission, or closes. And there's a link at the bottom. A lot of times if there's a link, you'll see it highlighted or in green and with an underline. So if you have refute this comment, you can go there to find out more information. But ultimately, an organization, if you do not have a board that's going to fundraise for your organization, at some point in time, your board will have to determine to reduce services, change the mission, or close. Just a fact. And I'm not going to tell you it's going to happen in a year or 2 years or 5 years or whatever. I don't know that, but I know that one of the essential elements of a not effective nonprofit organization is a board that fundraises. And trust me, I've had people who tell me, "Oh, I can't fundraise because I'm on city council or I'm on this or something." Everybody can fundraise. There's just different ways you do it. There are different, remember, every board member has different skills. And there are some people who cannot and should not go up to somebody and ask them for money, but they certainly can do research. They certainly can do marketing. They certainly can send out a social media post that talks about your organization. There are multitude, and that's why training is important. There are a multitude of ways for your board to support your organization via fundraising. That never means they have to ask a soul for money. And that includes advocating. And by advocacy, I'm not necessarily talking about going to city council or going to the legislature. I'm talking about what I call spreading the good news about your organization. Be the go person. How many times, how many people within your circle of friends or neighbors or family even know you're on this board and know that or know what this organization does? I was outside this last weekend raking leaves. Yeah, don't get me started. So I was doing some yard work and things like that. Started talking to the neighbors across the street. She was telling me they were having to go out and get a blood pressure machine, but they're not quite sure which, et cetera. You kind of get the idea, right? I'm on the board of our local library. And I said, did you know that you can check out a blood pressure machine at the library? Mind blown. Drop the mic, all that. No, she had no idea. And I know y'all's libraries may not be as incredible as mine. But yes, you can check out a blood pressure machine. So, and then what that did was that opened the door for me to spend 30 minutes telling her about all the other things that she'd have no idea that she could do at our library. And that's just the library. We could be doing it for your animal serving organization, your child serving organization. It's basically just getting the door open for you to basically advocate and say, again, why the community would be devastated if your organization did not exist. If you as a board member can do that, can effectively explain why the community would be devastated if this organization did not exist, you will get funding, you will get board members, you will get volunteers, you'll get everything that you need if you can really figure out how to do that effectively. Because one person, your executive director within your organization, can only talk to so many people. And I don't care if you're in Seattle, if you're in Houston, if you're in Dallas, or if you're in New York City, I don't care where you are. The ultimate goal of every board is to make sure that every single person in that community understands why the organization is essential. And again, you can be in a group, a city of 500 or 500,000 or 5 million. I don't care. That's your goal. You may not ever attain it, but you should be working towards it. Because with every single additional board member out there spreading the good news for your organization, more and more people are going to learn about your organization and understand your organization better. Some of your organizations have names that everybody knows: Habitat for Humanity, American Red Cross, United Way. We all are aware of those organizations, but you know what? We're not aware of what makes your organization unique. Why is your United Way different than everybody else? Because you do this or you have this focus. Why is your animal serving organization different? And that's the crutch, is taking an organization that has a name that everybody recognizes and being able to articulate it in a way that all of a sudden people are like, the Red Cross offers babysitting classes. Who knew? You didn't know that, did you? Right? So now you've learned something else. Annual evaluation should be conducted on everybody. We talked about evaluations for the executive director. Obviously, usually it's best to assign a committee to do this. So again, that committee is the paperwork committee. They're not the evaluators. They're the paperwork. What the best way this works is that you have some kind of tool, and if you need a tool, let me know. You have a tool, some kind of survey that every single board member, because every single board member should evaluate the executive director. So every single board member does what I'd like to do is put it into one document without attribution to anybody. So all of the information is anonymous. Now, yeah, people can kind of figure out if you had a beef with the executive director about something and it comes up on the evaluation, everybody's going to say, you said that. Okay, yeah. But the whole idea is to try to keep it as objective as possible. And then, of course, the executive director can refute the comments or correct the comments or things like that. But the important thing is that every single board member evaluates the executive director. And then, like I said, the board, you should do this, the board chair does the self-assessment, the individual self-assessments of the board members based on the board commitment letter. Remember I talked about that? But then in addition, you should have some sort of board assessment, and there's some links at the bottom here for one of those tools as well. So what a board assessment does is just generally assesses the full board, the functionality of the board. So are board meetings effective? Yes. No. Are they too long? Yes. Are they too short? Yes. Are they, so it's not necessarily in individual board members that you're reviewing. You're reviewing the full functionality of the board. Do you work together well? That kind of thing. So again, there should be 3 evaluations that you do. The executive director evaluation every year, the executive director evaluation, the board individual self-assessment, and the board assessment. And then regarding board tenure, you really need term limits. If you don't have term limits, we need to talk. Term limits are really, really essential because they bring in new blood, new ideas, new connections, new funding, new networks, just a lot of new different ideas to your board. And I know that sometimes a board can get very comfortable with an individual. Oh, we need to have so-and-so because they're the ones who are doing all the work, or they have the big money, or they know all the donors. Nobody is necessarily essential. You really need to make sure, because everybody's going to be gone at some point in time. Hopefully I'm not the first person to tell you this. Everybody's going to be gone, like really gone at some point in time. So you need to be prepared by bringing in new individuals, new blood, new connections, and new things. And sometimes board members feel like they can't leave. Well, if I leave, the whole thing's going to fall apart. Well, hopefully your organization will not fall apart if one person leaves. So you need to make sure that you have new board members coming in all the time. Like I said, the average is usually 3 years, renewable once. I was working with a board the other day that had a 9-year. That was really long time. But anyway, and then of course, where do they go when they leave the board? Well, to the friends group that we talked about earlier. Because you need to deal with unproductive board members. You get what you accept. If you accept somebody coasting along because they write a big check, well, chances are they'll still write a big check if they don't have to go to board meetings. I mean, a lot of times people will feel guilty. They know they're not fulfilling their obligations, and so they're looking for a way, a courteous, I can't think of the right word, but a good way out kind of thing. And so sometimes this is a way for you to do that. So you need to have term limits. You need to maintain those commitment letters, and you need to keep expectations and performances high with your board. Because if you have high expectations, they're more likely to meet those expectations. And then our last thing is attributes of effective nonprofit board member is everything that I've been talking about today. Commitment to the mission, understanding the board's governance roles, actively involved in board activities and committees, thinking and actively acting strategically, not being involved in day-to-day operations, abiding by those duties of loyalty, honesty, and and care, supporting the organization financially and through advocacy. That is the role of your board of an effective nonprofit board member. So without that kind of comes to the conclusion of my presentation. I want to give you a couple of resources. Like I said, the full presentation you're going to get, and there are a lot more slides than I have included. So you're going to see other information that I normally include, but just because of time limits, I wasn't able to. A lot of times there's basically some information about me, who I am, where some of the clients I've worked for. Chances are I've worked with some of your organizations or some organizations that do similar work. Sometimes people say, well, I need a good gift for somebody as they leave they transition off our board. We have so-and-so who's leaving a board. I need a good gift. Well, my suggestion is, instead of giving them a gift when they leave, give them a gift when they come on board. And Forces for Good is a great book to consider. So you may remember years and years ago, there's a book called Good to Great that was written by Jim Collins. And that was talking about for-profit organizations. Well, this takes the same theory and goes with nonprofits. They actually reviewed they identified 6 practices of high impact nonprofits, and understand that a lot of these nonprofits were not, yes, I think Habitat was one of the big ones but a lot of them were small organizations. So they looked at it, and you don't have to, trust me, you don't have to read the whole book, because at some point in time they get into the theory and to the numbers and stuff like that. But basically they came up with these 6: advocate, advocate, and serve, make markets work. My favorite is the inspire evangelists, and that's why I kind of focus on. Now, evangelist is a term that we usually say for religious organizations, I know. But if you think about what an evangelist is, like I said, going out and spreading the good news about your organization. Imagine if every single one of your board members was an inspired evangelist, going out there and preaching the good news and talking about your organization and what your organization is doing and how your organization is effective and why you're so critical to the community and everything like that. How much greater would your organization be? How many more donations would you get? How many more volunteers would you get? How much more impact would you have? So for that reason, I just think it's a good book to share with your board members. And like I said before, my advice and counsel are free. You have my name, my email address. Email is always the best way to contact me. And just follow up with me if you have any questions about anything that I've talked about. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is, this is not a commercial necessary for MonkeyPod, but MonkeyPod does have a product that you can use for board development. And I'm not going to endorse MonkeyPod necessarily or anything, but I'm going to tell you that I have worked with some organizations that have products that sometimes are effective and sometimes are not. I think that it's really important for you to have some kind of board development tool, because some people are working with Microsoft and have storage there, and some people have storage on Google, and Chrome, and it's just very, very confusing. And this provides you one format, one place, especially with the MonkeyPod product, where all of your minutes can go, all of your bylaws, all your documents, so that all of your board members can go to one place to get the information that they need about your organization. I can't adequately explain it that well, but I do think that these kind of products are essential to ensuring the organizational abilities of your board. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to the person who does know about about this MonkeyPod product, and that's Matt.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mary Beth. I really appreciate that. And again, we don't want to make this a sales pitch or anything like that, so I'll keep this short and sweet. But MonkeyPod has tools for managing your board as well as tools for managing your donors, your volunteers, online fundraising, email marketing. We're also accounting and grant management. So if you're curious about learning about any of those things, or if you want to see how we can support your organization, I'd love to talk. My email is here. You can also scan that code and schedule a demo if you'd like to. But like I said, I don't want to make this just a sales pitch or anything like that. So we'll turn it over to the Q&A now. If you have any questions, feel free to enter those in the chat. I also did just give folks the ability to unmute. So if you'd rather ask a question that way, feel free. I'm going to start with this question from Sharon, and I think this is in relation to sort of conflict of interest and how board members should interact with staff members. I think this was around the suggestion of not going on, board members shouldn't go on vacation with staff members. Sharon's question was, what about if the whole org are volunteers? What if many of the board members are also volunteer members? How do you navigate those types of relationships in your experience?
Very carefully.
Very carefully.
That is challenging. Okay, so if you're an all volunteer organization and do not have any paid individuals, then obviously you're going to have a lot of board members going into volunteers and friends, and there's going to be a lot of things like that. So the conflict is not really there, right? Because in that case, nobody has a monetary interest in the organization. You see, it really comes down to who has a monetary interest. So for instance, if and who so if you have a board member who is responsible for hiring and firing a person, I mean, you can see that in the corporate world. There, it's not right for them to have any kind of relationship, right? So it's the same goes here. So my answer to you, then this is really quick and we can talk offline, is in an all volunteer organization, when there really isn't any monetary situation, then it's less critical. We're talking about more where there is a direct conflict of interest. And I'm sorry if I didn't articulate that well.
No, I think that's really well said, Mary Beth. Of the really what it boils down to some extent is the financial aspect of it and making sure that there's no concerns on that front or nothing that anybody could take umbrage with. So I think when you're in those volunteer situations, because no one has any financial gain to gain from it, it sort of loosens things up a little bit. So very good question, though. Thank you for asking that, Sharon. We have another question here from Alex. Alex says, for a small nonprofit based in California, is it okay for the executive director to serve as the board secretary, recusing themselves from votes related to the ED role while maintaining, oh, sorry, just scrolled away for me, while maintaining voting power for non-ED related decisions?
Is it okay? Sure. Is it best practice? No.
Okay.
So let me explain. So I have seen situations where the board verbally reprimanded the executive director and told them to do something, right? And what happened was, in this situation, is the executive director chose to not include that information in the minutes. They just, oh, I forgot, kind of thing. But what happened was the board didn't recognize that was omitted. See, if somebody added like executive director gets a salary increase of 25%, you probably would notice that. But what you don't notice is things that are omitted, that are censored. And so in that case, the board didn't notice for like 3 or 4 months and finally came back around and said, didn't we ask you to do this? And the board and the executive director was like, no, it's not in the minutes. I don't think you asked me. So then it gets into he said, she said, or it gets messy. So for that reason, it's really the best practice for the executive director not and staff to not be taking the minutes for the board, because again, it's your board meeting, so it's your responsibility to the board.
Got it. That's great. Wonderful answer. I think it makes a lot of sense. And Alex agrees. Alex says, thank you. Next question that we have is from Sasha. Sasha says, Looking to the liaison and folks staying in their lane, do you have any recommendations to develop stronger staff and board member working relationships? She says, we have working committees where the ED recommends a board member joins, but staff feel like an outsider is joining as they don't have a working relationship with the board or a strong understanding of what the board member is bringing to the committee. So how can we strengthen those relationships between board members and staff, especially when they would be partnering together?
That's really challenging. Absolutely. So one of the things is chances are your staff needs to take a class like this. And I'm not saying here like promoting my class, you take this class to show them the recording, I mean, whatever. But one of the things you're saying is that the staff do not understand what the board's role is. And so the challenge is you don't want the staff thinking that the board is coming in to oversee or criticize or whatever what you're doing. So you need to make defined lanes, what the board member is doing. Like for instance, this board member is coming onto the marketing committee because they have public relations and marketing experience that is valuable for us. And this is why. And this is what they can do and what they can't do as a board member so that the staff again doesn't feel threatened by a board member. I have seen situations where board members eventually got staff fired and took over that position. I mean, this is reality, folks. Sometimes this happens. And so you have to take into consideration people's fears as well as the positive things, obviously. So making sure that there's good policies, that people know what the lanes are, what the roles are, and what the board member brings to that group. Like they have something to offer. Does that answer that completely? I know there's a lot more things I could say about this.
Yeah, no, I think it's a well said. It answers it very well. Sasha agrees. Yes, help frame. I'm actually going to ask you a follow-up question based on that. Getting to, whose job is it anyway? Who do you think has the greater sort of onus of responsibility in terms of making sure the relationship in terms of communicating understanding of the board's responsibility to the staff? Is it the board member's responsibility to be present and say, hey, this is what we do and sort of be very public facing that way? Or is it more on the ED to say, this is what the board is, this is who the board is, this is their responsibility? Who do you put more of the onus on in that situation?
The executive director.
Okay.
Because remember, the executive director is in communication and dialogue with the staff. And the board doesn't necessarily, I won't say the board never talks to staff, but the board, there shouldn't be that much interplay necessarily between the board and the staff. And there is, I mean, I was working for one organization where I didn't even know who the board members were. Okay. And was not allowed to talk to any board member, even if they walked by my office. Okay. That's bad. That's not good. Okay. I'm not endorsing that. But again, the fraternization where the lines start to blur and you start to forget who's staff and who's board and people start talking and doing things, then what happens is when things are going well, everything's fine. But the problem is when things go bad. And when things go bad, they go really bad and they go really bad really fast. And sometimes it's too late to stop it. So that's why we kind of keep these, like I said, the DMZ zone between the staff and the board.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's really, really, really well said. Okay, we are coming up against time here. Any final questions for Mary Beth or for me? I'll take a look at the chat here for one more minute. And like I said, we will be sending out this recording hopefully later this afternoon, if not first thing tomorrow. So if you all do want to take a look at anything that was presented here a second time or pass it along to any of your board members or any of your colleagues, feel free to do so. Doesn't look like we have any additional questions, so I'm going to wrap things up again here. Thank you all for attending. Thank you very much, Mary Beth, for presenting. Really appreciate your expertise and sharing that with you all. And like I said, if you have questions for either Mary Beth or myself, you've got my email here, and we'll make sure to include Mary Beth's contact information in our follow-up as well. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your days. Have a wonderful weekend. And thank you again.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.